Every town has a dark side. That painted smile and those exaggerated features, the loud, colorful clothing, the white-gloved hands reaching toward you. If your heart skips a beat when you spot a clown, well, you're not alone. And we've of course all seen the horror movies, and Pennywise lurking in storm drains, Art the Clown's blood-soaked antics and Terrifier. But the reality is that our fear for clowns wasn't manufactured in Hollywood, as many people think. Now the real story is way worse. Actual people were thrown on grease paint, red noses, and rainbow wigs before committing murder. And that's scarier than anything you could ever see on the big screen. And hey guys, it's Andrew, and thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Every Town Where Today. We have a very interesting episode for all you clown lovers and haters out there. No matter how you feel about them, there's no denying there's a cultural distrust when it comes to clowns. And the reasons behind it are varied, but all lead to one conclusion. Clowns are not to be trusted. And so let's pull back the curtain on why this deep gut-level creepiness exists and find out exactly why we fear the clowns. Now, before we get into the true crime side of things on this one, I want to present to you a little clown timeline so we can get a clearer picture on how exactly things went downhill. How these entertainers went from fun-loving goofballs and turned into literal walking nightmares. It didn't happen overnight. For centuries, clowns, whether pranksters, jesters, or harlequins, were brought around just for comic relief. The medieval kings had their court jesters, ancient China had its comedic performers, and Native American traditions featured trickster figures meant to entertain. And often, across all cultures, they wore strange clothes and makeup, hats or wigs, and this was all just to aid in the absurdity of it all. Whereas even just by looking at them, they were so out of place and strange looking that it was funny, and that was the point. And the modern clown as we know it started taking shape in the 19th century, thanks to a man named Joseph Grimaldi. And this guy basically invented clowning as a performance art. In the early 1800s in London, he packed theaters with his white face paint, exaggerated red cheeks, and bright blue mohawk. And he was so popular and funny that at one point, 1 in every 8 people in London had seen him perform. But offstage was a whole different story, and Grimaldi's life was a complete mess. He struggled with depression and lost his wife during childbirth, and watched his son, who followed in his father's footsteps and also became a clown, drink himself to death by 31. His physically demanding performances wrecked his body, leaving him in constant pain. And he even joked, "I am grim all day, but I make you laugh at night." And that whole idea, the clown who makes others laugh while secretly suffering, stuck. After his death, none other than Charles Dickens edited Grimaldi's memoirs, framing him as a tragic figure who paid for every laugh he gave. And just like that, the sad clown became part of pop culture, and the idea that something dark might be hiding beneath the makeup was born. Meanwhile, just across the border in France, another white-faced clown was making a name for himself, Jean-Gaspard Deborah, a famous mime who played Perrault. And Perrault is a character that is often seen as a symbol of suffering and the embodiment of an artist's struggles with the world around them. On stage, he was adored, but offstage, not so much. In 1836, he straight up killed a boy with his walking stick just because the kid insulted him on the street. And so, you can kind of see where all this clown-related unease started creeping in. By the late 19th century, circuses were the hottest ticket in town, and clowns became a staple act. But to keep up with the massive crowds, their performances got bigger, louder, and way more exaggerated. And giant props, wild gestures, chaotic energy. And even then, their humor had a weirdly dark edge. In 1876, French critic Edmond de Goncourt described clowns as terrifying and full of anxiety, comparing their frantic, over-the-top movements to something straight out of a lunatic asylum. And then came the 20th century, and clowns moved from the circus tent into American living rooms. And TV brought us Bozo the Clown and Ronald McDonald, turning clowns into kid-friendly icons. And this new image, bright, cheerful, harmless, became the norm, which ironically made any hint of darkness behind the makeup way more unsettling. Now, this whole thing we're talking about actually has a name, coulrophobia, aka the fear of clowns. It's not officially listed in psychology manuals, but let's be honest, that doesn't make it any less real. And just look at a clown's face. The too wide smile frozen in place, the exaggerated eyes, something about it just feels off. And there's actually science behind that feeling. It's called the uncanny valley effect. And it's that weird unease we get when something is almost human, but not quite right. And clowns fit the bill perfectly. Our brains recognize them as people, but their distorted features set off alarm bells as we try to figure out what their real deal is behind the mask. Psychologist Frank McAndrew dug into this in the first major study on creepiness. And it turns out what makes something creepy isn't outright fear. It's actually unpredictability. And clowns, well, they thrive on being unpredictable.
Hey, what's this?
Their whole act is about surprise, breaking social norms, pulling pranks, keeping you guessing. And as McAndrew put it, if a person is willing to flout the conventions of society by dressing and acting as they do, what other rules might they be willing to break? And that's what keeps us on edge. You never really know what a clown is going to do next. And then there's another layer, hidden emotions. Our brains are wired to read facial expressions. A slight smirk, a furrowed brow, a twitch of the lips. And we pick up on these tiny clues without even thinking. They help let us know if someone is friendly or poses a threat. But clown makeup erases all of that. And that big painted smile is just a mask. You have no idea what's actually going on underneath. Is the person happy, angry, or plotting something? That uncertainty creates a low-key, gut-level unease. And it's exactly why so many psycho killers in horror movies wear masks. 'Cause it's scary. Now, some people will say, well, it's just a kid's fear. But that's not true at all. Sure, clown fear often starts young, around age 2 or 3, right when kids are figuring out what's real and what's not. A giant exaggerated face? Well, yeah, that's a lot to process. But plenty of adults never shake that feeling. Psychologists estimate that about 2% of grown-ups have a legit, full-blown clown phobia, with countless others who just don't trust the things. And so when you add it all up, the eerie appearance, the unpredictable behavior, the masked emotions, the unsettling contrast between goofy persona and who knows what's underneath, well, maybe that fear of clowns isn't so irrational after all. Especially since there are real people who decided to take advantage of it in the most horrifying ways possible.
Tonight in News Extra, the man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing...
When people talk about coulrophobia, one name always comes up. It's John Wayne Gacy. At this point, his story is practically a cliche in discussions about creepy clowns, but honestly, the impact he had on our collective psyche cannot be overstated. So a quick refresher just in case you forgot or never knew what he did. Back in the 1970s, Gacy seemed like a model citizen in his Chicago suburb. He ran a successful contracting business, was involved in local politics, and this is the part that really sticks, he performed as Pogo the Clown at kids' hospitals and charity events, all thanks to a local clown club called the Jolly Jokers.
The clowning was relaxation for me. I enjoyed entertaining kids. Like some people are, they unwind in different ways, either we're going out drinking or that. I could put on clown makeup and I was relaxed. And I enjoyed doing it.
But behind the red nose and oversized shoes, he was an absolute monster. Between 1972 and 78, Gacy assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys, burying most of them in the crawl space underneath his house.
There were half a dozen pieces of evidence that were just overwhelming, but Gacy now says that he refutes that evidence, and all he's owning up to is having some knowledge of just 5 of the murders and direct knowledge of even fewer than that.
His double life unraveled in December of 78, when 15-year-old Robert Peast went missing, last seen talking to Gacy about a potential job. And when police finally caught him, Gacy confessed, describing himself chillingly as judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people. And just to make things even creepier, while awaiting trial, he started painting clowns, including self-portraits as Pogo. Even after his crimes were exposed, he clung to that clown persona like he enjoyed the horror it caused.
When I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time. That's why I always enjoyed clowning.
Now, to be clear, there's no evidence that Gacy ever killed while dressed as a clown, but that didn't matter. The image of a smiling, friendly clown hiding pure evil was enough to earn him the nickname the Killer Clown. The media ran with it. After Gacy, pop culture clowns took a hard turn into nightmare territory. In 1986, Stephen King introduced the world of Pennywise in It, a shape-shifting entity that literally feeds on children's fears. The Poltergeist clown scene, that was 1982. Then came Killer Clowns from Outer Space in 88, and Clown House in 89. And later the Saw franchise with its creepy clown face puppet. And most recently, you have Art the Clown in the Terrifier series, which, by the way, those movies are kinda out of control. And definitely don't watch any of these if you're a true coulrophobic. But while Gacy is the most infamous real-life killer linked to clowns, he's not the only one. And there have been others who blurred the line between circus fun and real-life terror, and their stories, they only add fuel to the fear. On a quiet Saturday morning in May of 1990 in Wellington, Florida, a wealthy and peaceful town, 40-year-old Marlene Warren was having breakfast at home with her son Joe and a few of his friends. And Joe was recovering from a broken leg, so when they spotted a clown walking up the driveway holding balloons and flowers, their first thought wasn't fear, it was curiosity. And maybe it was a cheerful get-well delivery for Joe. And Marlene went to answer the door. The moment she opened it, everything changed.
Marlene Warren answered the door of her home outside West Palm Beach to find a woman dressed as a clown, delivering flowers and a balloon reading, "You're the greatest." Suddenly, the clown pulled out a gun and shot Marlene in the face before fleeing.
She collapsed as the clown turned, walked calmly back to a white Chrysler LeBaron, and got in and drove off. Not speeding, not running, just leaving. Marlene fought for her life in the hospital for 2 days before she died. As if the murder itself wasn't twisted enough, the killer had left behind a cruel detail, the balloons. One read, "You're the greatest," and another featured characters from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Police immediately went for Marlene's husband, Michael. and their marriage had been rocky, and Marlene had already told both her mother and son that she was afraid of him. She actually even said that if anything happens to me, Mike did it. However, Mike had an alibi, and he was on his way to a racetrack with friends at the time of the murder. And that's when investigators started looking at another name, Sheila Keene. Now, Sheila worked for Michael, repossessing cars for his used car dealership, Bargain Motors. But according to co-workers, Sheila wasn't just an employee. She and Michael were involved, and she loved him.
A jealous mistress who wanted Michael Warren for herself.
And then they found the evidence. 2 nights before the murder, a woman matching Sheila's description bought a clown costume, wig, and makeup from a local costume shop. A supermarket employee later identified Sheila as looking a lot like the woman who had purchased the exact flowers and balloons found at the crime scene. And then there was the getaway car. The white Chrysler LeBaron was eventually found, and inside investigators discovered orange synthetic fibers, consistent with a clown wig. They also found strands of brown human hair. When they searched Sheila's home, they found more orange fibers in her closet. It seemed obvious, but this was 1990. DNA testing wasn't where it needed to be, and so prosecutors hesitated. Without the gun, without the clown costume, and with varying witness descriptions, Joe, for example, initially thinking the clown was a tall man, there just wasn't enough for an arrest. And while the case stalled, Michael actually got himself caught up in something else, a huge fraud scandal. Investigators uncovered a mess of racketeering, insurance fraud, and odometer tampering at his business. He was convicted on 43 counts and he went to prison, but for fraud, not for his wife's murder. And Sheila, she vanished. Years passed, no arrest, no closure. Joe, haunted by his mother's murder, struggled with alcoholism and drug addiction. And then, 27 years later, everything changed. In 2017, cold case investigators used advanced DNA testing to reanalyze the hair from the getaway car. This time, the results were clear. The DNA matched Sheila Keene. After Michael had gotten out of prison, he and Sheila had reunited, and in 2002, they got married. They've been